Welcome to the S.O.A.P Bible Study Series from Oak Tree Community Church in South Bend, Indiana. We have come to the end of 1 Kings.
Yay.
We have been working
It's always
through.
good finishing.
Yeah. That means we get to start a new book next time.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are 3 chapters left, and there's still some stuff to do in here.
Yeah. And we're only halfway through too.
That's true, because
Right.
First and Second Kings
we're
are
together
really,
as one whole book.
Yeah.
All right. So last week was mostly about the prophet Elijah.
Yeah.
God told them to call out the Baal prophets. They had a contest. God ends up raining fire down. God wins. Yay!
and then raining water down.
Yeah, exactly.
And
So we
rain.
also ended a drought with, I think, a 3-year drought against Israel. And the most important piece from God's point of view is the nation of Israel coming back to him and recognizing that he was their God or is their God.
And just by way of reminder, we're going to keep saying this, but when we say the nation of Israel, we have to make sure we're keeping the distinction.
Thank
It's
you.
the kingdom of Israel, because the nation is still, the Jewish
up,
people, right? So we've got the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. And we are focusing, last week we were focusing on the kingdom of Israel, right?
Right. So last week it also ended with Elijah running from his life from Jezebel, the Jezebel. Ended up talking to God and seemingly kind of resigning his commission.
Yeah.
Kind of a nice way to put it. Yeah, to the next generation.
Handing off the baton. And at the beginning of Second Kings, we actually find out where we get that phrase, handing off the mantle. Comes in out of Second Kings,
Very nice.
From the same Elijah and Elisha that we were introduced last time.
Okay. So the king of Syria and 32 other kings raised an army.
That seems like
a lot.
Big.
Right. Either these armies are really small, but
they're 4 guys with you.
It's over 100,000 guys.
Yeah.
We'll find out here in a minute. But they came to attack Israel, right? The northern kingdom.
Yep.
They were overconfident. They sent a couple messages to King Ahab. Then they attacked after they'd been drinking, so they were drunk.
Because that's always the right move.
Right before war.
We're going to celebrate before we attack.
Well, and so that's definitely the kings, but it sounded like the soldiers were kind of drunk too. Maybe. But we're talking an army of 7,000 against 125,000, roughly.
Roughly, yeah. 7,000.
We could probably have a couple of drinks first.
It seems like it's a pretty foregone conclusion that Syria wins this one.
Yeah. So God told Ahab to attack, right? Now's the time you need to attack and go on the offensive. And he did with 7,000 men, and he won. So Ben-Hadad, one of the kings
From Syria.
He regrouped. And he was told, you didn't win because you fought him in the mountains. You're a plains king. You need to fight on the plains. So you're guaranteed to win if you fight on the plains.
Yeah.
So he attacked again with 127,000 men. God took it personally. He showed up again with 7,000, and the Israeli army killed 100,000 Syrian soldiers.
Yeah.
I mean, massive.
Yeah.
Then
Big
the other
win for Israel.
What's that?
Big win for Israel.
So what happened to the other 127,000? They took off running, and it says a wall fell on them. I don't get how a wall can kill 27,000 people, but pretty big wall.
Yeah.
After that, Syria made a peace treaty with Ahab.
So you have to remember that if they're fleeing into a city to try to take refuge there, these cities, the wall was their fortification, right?
So true. That's very true.
So
very
if you
thick,
think
very big.
let's say Lord of the Rings, right?
Yep.
So you've got the orcs trying to get into Helm's Deep or whatever. Right. Huge walls that you can run chariots and horses and stuff on. And big rocks. We're not talking, bricks. We're talking huge rocks that are falling. And so if you think of it from a movie standpoint, obviously that's fiction, but the same type of concept where these huge stones are just literally rolling over people and killing, dozens at a time.
Right.
So
now the question is, what happens to their king? And Ahab made a deal with him and let him go. And God seemed to have a little problem with that.
Well, yeah.
I get it. So he was passing by some soldiers, and there was an injured prophet, and he told Ahab that he had a prisoner, and he had lost that prisoner. And now he was either going to be killed, or he had to pay two talents to get his life and pay for the prisoner's life too.
Right.
And Ahab said, sounds fair to me. And then, of course, the prophet revealed himself,
Da-da-da!
not injured.
Sort of like Nathan and David. You are the guy. This is your story. You know?
Yeah. And he said, you released a man God determined should die, so you're going to pay for that death with your own life.
Yep.
And then in chapter 21, we get to see the darker side of Jezebel, right? So far, okay, she was killing some prophets, some Jewish prophets.
Yeah.
Which is, bad.
And going after Elijah,
Yep. So now there's a scenario that takes place here.
This actually has been one of my favorites since I was a kid.
Yeah, you want to tell it?
I'm not. Just this. So they're in Samaria, and Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom.
Right.
Okay. So it's in the tribe of Ephraim, and it starts out so innocuous.
I want to build a garden.
That's right. I want to build a garden. And Ahab is this whiny. He throws a 2-year-old temper
you
tantrum.
think he's a king for 22 years. You think he's gonna be all kingly, and he's a whiny.
He wants to build this garden.
I want to build it there,
right there,
and he won't let me.
Yeah,
That's
because
exactly.
he owns. This dude Naboth or Nebaioth or whatever owns a vineyard. And that's where Ahab has to build his garden, has to build his, whatever. Yeah. And so he's going to pay him for it.
Yeah, a generous offer.
Yeah.
And even said, okay, I'll pay you outright. I'll even give you this tract, which is even better over here.
Yeah. Well, if it's better, then why don't you use it? Right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Because that was for wine, and he wanted green vegetables.
And Naboth has a really good reason. He said, listen, this is my family's land, and under God's law, God's law, it's supposed to, even if you sold it or whatever, it's going to revert back, and maybe the year of Jubilee was too far away and he didn't want it, but it's family land, and we're not going to do that.
So the Northern Kingdom, even though they weren't following a lot of things, would still have been following that.
Well, so you've got to, every country. You say, is the country good or bad? Well, the country's good. The country's bad. Well, if the country is good or bad, does that mean every individual in the country is good or type thing? Right. So this country, so the kingdom of Israel, is going far away from God, but that doesn't mean that every individual in the kingdom is rebelling against God. This seems to be seems to be a good guy, right?
Yeah.
Ahab, he literally, what we're told here is he goes into his bedroom and lays on his bed and faces the wall and pouts.
So
that's my favorite part of the story, actually.
Yeah. So Jezebel comes in and says, I'll take care of it.
But she says, you are the king of Israel. What are you doing?
Right.
Yeah, maybe that's my favorite part. Act like put your big boy pants on.
But she had to know it, right? And she, from everything, she had to intentionally put herself in that position of power.
Oh, yeah.
To know that she could be there, to know that she could run over him.
Oh, yeah.
To know that she could take care of him. But it probably was too much every now and then. Would you grow up?
Right. And like you said, she's like, I'll take care of this.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Yeah,
That's
right.
when stops crying. And so she writes out orders and signs it with the king's name, meaning this isn't the first time or the last time that's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. She's got his ring. She signs it, stamps it.
And probably everybody's like, ooh, this is the real king, instead of the guy who's crying. She sent it out to the leaders and nobles of the city and said, hey, I want you guys to observe a time of fasting and then seat Naboth, this is the guy who owned the vineyard, in front of people with 2 villains. I love the villains part, so you know that they're the bad guys.
Yeah, on either
and
side.
then at an appropriate time have them say, you curse God and you curse the king, and then take him out and stone him.
Well, because you got to have 2 witnesses.
Yep, and here they are.
Under the law, you have to have 2 witnesses. Right. There's the 2 witnesses.
Right, and they hear it. It's done in public. Everything's done. So once
just up and up, all everything's above board, legal.
Yeah. Right. So once his death was reported, Jezebel then told Ahab, go take possession of the vineyard. So that also says to me there was no next of kin, right?
Yeah,
and,
who's going to
and
take
that it was
over?
up. Yeah. So God told Elijah, go meet King Ahab, at the vineyard and confront him, and tell him God blamed him for that murder. So what I noticed is God tells Elijah what to say, and Elijah says something different
Yeah, vastly different.
to Ahab.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem right. Prophets get in trouble for this kind of thing.
Right, yeah. God said to Elijah, here's one verse, go tell him this. And Elijah goes off on this big long rant, right?
Right.
So,
So either stuff we
yeah, I mean,
was
you have a
left
couple of
out,
options. So either the writer did not write the whole thing down twice, say this. But sometimes that does happen. So you're like, well, why does it sometimes happen? Why doesn't it sometimes happen? Another option is God trusts Elijah and says, this is the message for Ahab.
do it.
Go do it. And he brought in he included everything that God did say,
Right.
embellished it some, but not out of,
Yeah, it wasn't
like,
but it was just different.
yeah, it was the same stuff that, your whole dynasty is going to be wiped out. Well, we've seen that how many times, with bad kings and stuff. So, but here's the important part, is that every time God sends a prophet to proclaim disaster, there's still a goal of repentance. It's the same thing with Jonah. Go to the king of Nineveh. Well, in the book of Jonah, it doesn't say exactly what he's supposed to say, and he actually said less. He really tried to, and they still repented. And that's what happens here. Even as bad as Ahab was, he still repented, at least temporarily.
Right.
And God withdrew the judgment, at least the full judgment. He pulled back because repentance is always the goal.
Right. So then Elijah tells Ahab, look, what you're doing is evil inside of the Lord. He's ready to bring disaster on you and your family, much like Jeroboam and he named other kings. Exactly what you said. They were wiped out. And then he also said, dogs will devour Jezebel by the outer wall. And then as for your family, dogs are going to eat the ones who died in the city, and birds are going to eat the ones that die in the country. And then verses 25 and 26, they're in parentheses, which doesn't sound very Hebrew to me.
Yeah, well, I mean,
yeah.
it's obviously that's sort of the net way of identifying that this seems to be a side comment.
Yeah, and a side comment, there's never been anyone like Ahab who was firmly committed to doing evil in the sight of the Lord, urged on by his wife Jezebel. So this guy is a terrible guy.
Yeah.
In a whole host of terrible guys.
Yeah.
He's the head terrible guy.
And there will be even worse that come after him.
Right.
But even this terrible guy repented.
Right. So surprisingly,
to a level, right?
He heard these words. He tore his clothes. He put on sackcloth. He fasted, and God says to Elijah, "Hey, you noticed Ahab?
Yeah. You see?
He's showing remorse." And he said, "Look, I have to follow through, but we're going to wait until he dies, and we'll bring disaster on his son and the family."
Yeah.
So kind of a cool thing, and I think that is our takeaway. No matter what we've done in our life, God has seen it. God knows. There's repentance while you're still alive.
And yeah. I mean, there's always hope, even for this guy who was unmatched in his wickedness and evilness and his wife and everything. God was still willing to extend grace if he repented, which again, he did a little bit, not complete. I mean, it wasn't like, complete 180-degree turnaround, but it was something.
Right. So then we hit the last chapter, chapter 22, and again, this is the last chapter of First Kings, and when we go into Second Kings, it's going to amazingly start up kind of abruptly, because they used to be one book and they got split apart. So there's a fairly abrupt ending here, but we generally see Israel, the northern kingdoms, at war with Judah, the southern kingdoms, and not necessarily a full war, but battles, skirmishes, kind of fights. But now we understand that there's been 3 years of peace, and there's an alliance between Israel and Judah, and now they're going to go battle against Syria.
Against Syria, right? So we actually have a little bit of time of friendship, alliance. Against Syria. And remember, Syria was the one that we just said, 32 kings got to, this whole thing, to fight against Israel. So,
and we've seen before where they've banded together and they fought Syria. We've seen the southern kingdom make a deal with Syria and go fight the northern kingdom. So everybody's kind of fighting everybody.
The enemy of your enemy is my friend, type of thing going on here.
So King Ahab's the king of Israel, and in the southern kingdom we have a King Jehoshaphat.
Yep.
So all of King Ahab's prophets said, "You're going to win. You know, oh, we got this one in the bag." King Jehoshaphat, he wanted to hear from his prophets too.
Yeah.
And which is a good thing.
Because Jehoshaphat was a good king.
Yeah.
He was one of the godly kings of Judah, and he's like, yeah, I'm not sure I trust your prophets. I'd really like to hear somebody who talks to God.
So Ahab knew that he had a prophet, or the Jehoshaphat had a prophet. Is it Micah?
Micaiah.
Micaiah.
Yeah. Yep.
That was always against him.
Yeah, and that's so funny. He's like, I don't listen to him. He never says anything good for me. He's always bad about me. And Jehoshaphat's like, really? I'd like to hear from this
So
guy.
let's call him. So they waited, brought him up, and he actually sided with Ahab's prophets.
He's like, oh yeah, you're gonna win. He's like,
this war would be a good thing.
yeah, you've never been on my side. I'm not sure if I trust you.
So he pressed him. He pressed him on one. Are you telling the truth? And he's like, no.
Nah, how'd you know?
Right. But he says a pretty amazing thing. He said that he saw in God's throne room, and this happens a few times in the Old Testament, right? Isaiah chapter 6, huge verses in there. And he says that God was in his throne room, and God says, who is going to deceive Ahab so he will attack this city and end up dying down there?
This is when I teach angelology, which is the doctrine of angels.
Yep.
So creatively
Professor.
named. This is one of the passages that I come to because this gives us a peek into how God administrates the world. Right. We know God administrates the world, and we think God is in charge of all things, and whatever. But how He does it, we sometimes forget that God uses his agents in his administration. And his agents are both human and angelic. And here God says, this is what needs to happen. How are you going to do it? And it's really an interesting peek behind the curtain.
It is. It's
of,
huge.
Of God's administration in the world.
Yep. God says, there's going to be a lying spirit that comes and out of the mouth of all of his prophets, and they will deceive and really overpower them.
Yeah.
And somebody stands up and says, I'll do it.
Yeah. So there's an
amazing.
angel or a spirit. There's an angel that says, I will be a deception in the mouth, so that he will go do this. Which also tells me, and God says, fine, that's the best idea I've heard. And of course, there's a little bit of anthropomorphism going on there. But God, and we think, God cannot lie, God is always truth and everything. But God allowed this deception to happen. In fact, God prompted this deception to happen against his enemies in matters of war. Right? And so I think there's a principle there. Some things are not quite as, black and white or cut and dried as we would like them to be, because God says, I need somebody to lie to this guy because he's not listening to the truth, and this is what needs to happen. So be uncomfortable. It is okay to be uncomfortable and wrestle with these things as you're reading this. Don't just gloss over it.
That's a great way to put it.
Allow the scriptures to make you uncomfortable and rethink some of these things that maybe you thought were a little bit easier than they might be.
Right. So the prophet, they're going to lock him in prison now. And
Micaiah, the good prophet.
Yeah, the good one. And Micaiah says, fine. But if you really do safely return, then the Lord didn't speak through me.
Yeah,
everybody take note of this.
Yeah, I'm going to lock you in, and I'll deal with you when I get back. Yeah. And he's like, if you get back,
Yeah.
God wasn't talking to me.
Yeah.
I love that line.
Yeah. All right, so the kings attack. Syria. Ahab comes up with this grandiose plan because he's going to fool God, that he's going to disguise himself while Jehoshaphat goes out in his kingly robes.
Right. Because the enemy.
What's that?
Right?
Go ahead.
Because the enemy is going to go for the king.
Right.
So you wear all your bright colors, and I'm going to be dressed up like a soldier over here.
Yep. Meanwhile, the king of Syria commanded all of his troops go for the king.
Yeah.
That's what we want to go for. So they did figure out, hey, it's the wrong king, and an archer shoots an arrow at a random person. Happens to be our king, who was in disguise. Of course, hits perfectly. And he's propped up in his chariot. You can see him, kind of leaning forward. Yeah. And a pool of blood in the bottom of the chariot, and he dies. and that's King Ahab that dies. They washed out the chariot in a pool in Samaria,
Yep.
and the dogs were licking the blood.
Where have I heard that
Yeah,
before?
maybe, yeah, just like
Elijah
God
said.
said it would happen.
Yep.
Yeah. So Jehoshaphat was 35 years old when he became the king of Judah. He reigned for 25 years. He was one of the good kings.
Yep.
Like Solomon, Jehoshaphat seemed to have a fleet of merchant ships.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't say he sent them all around the world, but he would send them out, right?
Yeah.
And get spices from places
Yep.
to bring back.
Yep.
So there was no king in Edom. So now, where's Edom and where did this come from?
Yeah, this is sort of a line in passing. Edom is the family of Esau, so they're cousins to Israel. We've seen them off and on a little bit. Sometimes they really liked, and we'll see this more and more, they liked to side with the northern kingdom against the southern kingdom, typically. And they're modern day Jordan on the southeast corner of the Dead Sea. Okay. Which is where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be before Genesis 18 and 19. They're sort of like this little nuisance area that keeps coming up against Judah, right? We talked about Obadiah recently, not the prophet Obadiah, but another Obadiah. So the prophet Obadiah was specifically sent to prophesy against Edom, and that they were going to be wiped out.
Okay. So we end this the book. Ahab's son takes over, becomes king of Israel, and he did evil in sight of the Lord.
What do you know?
Yeah, and that's where we end,
That's
right?
the end.
It's a fairly abrupt ending, but again, it picks up with 2 Kings chapter 1 is the next thing
And it
that
just
happens.
keeps pushing through. Yeah.
So we're really halfway through Kings, even though we just finished 1 Kings.
Yeah, but it does bring us to the end of what we call First Kings, and at some point we'll do Second Kings, and whether that's next or not, but depending on the order that you're watching the videos in, at some point watch for Second Kings to come. But in these last 3 chapters, there's definitely some stuff to slow down, pay attention to, listen to, and allow yourself to learn, but also wrestle with the scriptures.
I like the way you said.
Be uncomfortable.
Yeah, be uncomfortable.
Let it be uncomfortable. A couple of things to be uncomfortable with. Also, this idea that even somebody like Ahab can repent. Maybe there's somebody whom you know that seems way too far gone. They'll never come back. I wouldn't be so sure about that. And if they do, God's willing and ready and waiting for them. And so that person that maybe you're still praying for, keep praying. Keep praying. As long as they're alive, they're not without hope. And I think that's a great lesson to learn in this Old Testament chapter in First Kings.
Yeah, right.
Pretty cool there. So if you have one of those stories, we would love to hear that. And if you have questions, we'll take those as well, help you study and learn. And we will start a new book when we come back next time.